Israeli terrorists have killed 4 more journalists in Gaza, and this time they are not even spreading any lies about these brave souls Hamas link. This happened when Israeli terrorists dropped American bombs at a hospital in Khan Yunus area. Among those killed are reporters from Reuters news agency, Associated Press news agency, and Aljazeera. The 4 brave journalists murdered by Israeli terrorists have been identified as Hossam al-Masri, Mariam Dagga, Mohammed Salameh, and Muath Abu Tahab. This comes just days after former US State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller admitted that the Biden administration lied all along to hide Israeli war crimes. Now let's look at these developments in detail. The Reuters news agency has issued a statement confirming that its cameraman Hossam al-Masri was among those murdered by Israeli terrorists at a targeted attack on a hospital in Gaza today. The British news agency added that one of their contractors was also injured in the strikes. According to reports, cameraman al-Masri was killed in the first strike while Reuters photographer Hatem Khalid was wounded in a second strike. The agency said, and I quote, "We are devastated to learn of the death of Reuters contractor Hossam al-Masri and injuries to another of our contractors, Hatem Khalid, in Israeli strikes on the Nasser hospital in Gaza today." End quote. The Associated Press, also known as the AP, said that Mariam Dagga, a freelance journalist working for it, was also killed. The AP said that it was shocked and saddened by the 33-year-old's death. Journalist Mohammed Salameh was working for Aljazeera, and earlier reports said that photographer Muath Abu Taha worked for US TV network NBC, which later said that Taha did not work for it. The Israeli terrorist group, the IDF, confirmed it had murdered the journalists. The BBC carried a statement from the IDF which said, and I quote, "The Chief of the General Staff instructed to conduct an initial inquiry as soon as possible," adding, "The IDF regrets any harm to uninvolved individuals and does not target journalists as such." So Israeli terrorists are not even making any excuses this time around to justify their ghastly act, like they did to justify the murder of 6 journalists a few days ago. The reason the rogue regime of war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't feel the need to justify its cruelty and barbarism is because it knows it has the backing of the US, the UK, and the wider West. This was further confirmed by none other than Matthew Miller, who worked as the State Department spokesperson in the Biden administration. You may remember how he shamelessly defended Israel every time bloodthirsty members from Netanyahu's medieval gang of terrorists caused unspeakable carnage in Gaza during the Biden administration. First, listen to his revelation made to an Israeli TV network.
Before the invasion of Rafah, we were working on a shorter deal. We'd been working on the phased proposal, but the Israeli government agreed to a proposal for just a 6-week ceasefire, not tied to any permanent end to the war. We were publicly urging Hamas to accept it, and there was a good reason for Hamas to agree to that, which is there was an invasion of Rafah looming, and this might be a way to avert that invasion. And in the middle of that proposal being submitted to Hamas, the prime minister publicly said that Israel was going to invade Rafah whether there was a ceasefire or not. And you can imagine how much harder that made it to get a deal over the line. Hamas didn't accept the proposal, then they've lost the chief motivation to agree to a deal. And there were times that we very much wanted to go public and make clear that we thought the prime minister was being completely intransigent and making it tougher to get a deal. But we discussed it amongst ourselves, and we made the decision that it wouldn't accomplish anything. And if we had seen in a number of cases, Sinwar pull back from negotiations when he thought there was division between the United States and Israel. And so we wanted to speak very toughly to the government of Israel behind closed doors, but ultimately not do anything that we thought would make it harder to get to a deal. We told the government of Israel only an hour or two before the speech, because frankly, we had spent the last few months seeing the government of Israel at times try and sabotage an approach to get to a ceasefire, and we were determined not to let that happen here.
Now, after intensive diplomacy, Israel has offered a comprehensive new proposal. It's a roadmap to an enduring ceasefire and the release of all hostages.
In a way, basically, that boxed the prime minister in and made it very difficult for him to walk away from.
Thank you very much.
It's consistent with the pattern we saw for many months. They were always looking for ways to add conditions or make the terms more difficult.
So according to him, it was Netanyahu and not Hamas who opposed the ceasefire. Isn't it clear now that the Biden administration was lying to the world to hide Israel's genocidal action in Gaza, just the way Trump administration is doing the same? Because if you watched his press conferences, Matthew Miller's press conferences that we kept posting on our channel, Janta Ka Reporter, you can go back and watch those videos in your own time. You would see the ugly face of the entire Biden administration and their direct participation in the genocide of Palestinians. Here are a few examples when Miller lied to reporters. Despite knowing that Netanyahu was opposing the ceasefire, he kept blaming Hamas all through 2024 until the last day of his job in 2025. But now he has chosen to tell the truth. Clearly, he can't escape his complicity and that of his former boss, Antony Blinken, and other members of the Biden administration. Biden had announced the ceasefire. It's very important to remember this. Biden had announced the ceasefire proposal in May last year, calling it an Israeli proposal, even though we now learn from Miller that Biden had lied. And despite Hamas accepting the proposal, what was Miller telling reporters on 13th of June? Only a few days later, he was blaming Hamas.
Just one clarity just on the fact of, numerous Israeli officials saying that they'd rather not stop until they complete their aims of the war. Is there any response to that?
Again, Israel put forward this proposal that the president laid out that gets you an immediate ceasefire. Yes, there was going to have to be hard negotiations about how to get from phase 1 to phase 2. And that includes how you end the war and what the conditions are for ending the war. And Israel would, I'm sure, have demands in that, as Hamas would have demands. But what's the harm in taking the ceasefire and stopping the daily death and having that discussion later? We fail to see what that harm would be. We think Hamas should have agreed. We should have a ceasefire now, and then we could have had those discussions, but at least the daily death toll would stop and there'd be humanitarian assistance surging in. Unfortunately, that's not where we are.
2 days later, on 15th of June, he repeated his lie again. What was also noticeable that he singled out Palestinian journalist Saeed Arakat for constant bullying because racists and bigots find it easy to target a person of color to hide their savagery.
I feel that the attack on Mawasi that killed close to 100 Palestinians, injured about 300 others and so on, under the pretext of targeting Hamas leaders, which is really a very convenient...
A pretext is a big word, Saeed. I just
okay,
want to make sure that's the word you mean.
Okay, under the claim that they were targeting Hamas leaders, which they never have to prove anyway. They can say, we know that this X person was there and Y person was there, so we target them, we kill all these people, then nobody's going to ask us. And the most they can do is just, we will launch an investigation, which we never hear the results of. So you don't feel that such a crime, really, using F-35 to bomb 2 places, one of them against the respondents, the first responders and so on, while the other was going on. You don't think this is an attempt by the Israeli government to just basically say, you can go, fly a kite? So
Saeed, if you were the representative of the Palestinian people charged with negotiations for this ceasefire, is the idea that the loss of civilian life would make you less committed to reaching a ceasefire? I guess I don't understand the logic of the question.
I'm not talking about the Palestinians.
No. I'm just saying that if the idea is somehow that this strike and the loss of civilian life would somehow jeopardize negotiations for a ceasefire because the other side wouldn't want to reach a ceasefire, I don't think I understand the claim.
No, I think what we have seen in statements and indeed in the negotiations that Hamas is really, at least it appears to be committed to the negotiations and so on. But what we have seen is a pattern by the Israeli government that every time we get close to the results, we get something like this. We get a bombardment that, in the hope that it will scuttle, and leave it, to keep the onus on Hamas, so to speak. So we're not concerned about the Palestinians are committed to this ceasefire, but are you certain that Israel is committed to the points that were, stated by the president on May 31?
They are committed to the proposal that they put forward, that the president publicly described on May 31st. They have said that publicly. They have affirmed that to us privately. And they have committed to trying to work to reach a ceasefire and bridge the remaining differences. And that work is ongoing. It was ongoing here inside our building today.
If I might follow up on that.
Go ahead.
Didn't you just justify political violence?
Go ahead.
You just justified. You said Hamas should negotiate.
There are people in this room.
You just justified.
There are people in this room who come and raise their hand and ask questions, and I'm going to call on them. Go ahead, please.
Miller's boss, Blinken, who many believe has dual American-Israeli citizenship, lied on 11th of June by claiming that Israel had agreed to the ceasefire proposal. In reality, we now know that it was a lie because Miller himself has revealed the truth now.
You say that everyone but Hamas has agreed to this. Benjamin Netanyahu has certainly said otherwise publicly, and the hostage families are saying you should try everything if this fails. And it's quite possible it will fail, with him now toughening his position, more likely, with his right-wing partners. If this fails, they want you to work through Qatar and deal with Hamas to get the Americans home. And we are reporting at NBC News that that is being discussed as a backup plan, if no other way to get a ceasefire, doing it without Israel agreeing to a ceasefire. Can you tell us about that? And also, if the war continues, won't the Palestinian death toll be unacceptable? As the National Security Advisor in Israel has said, to the end of the year, after such a horrific death toll in getting the hostages out militarily this weekend.
First, let me be very clear. Israel has accepted the proposal. In fact, they were critical in putting it forward. So the only party, no, that is what the official position of the Israeli government and the Prime Minister. So the only party that has not accepted, the only party that's not said yes, is Hamas. That's who everyone's waiting on. That's who the Palestinians in Gaza are waiting on. It's who the Israelis are waiting on. It's who the hostages and the hostage families are waiting on. It's who the entire region and the entire world is waiting on. And so we'll see. Does Hamas want to end this conflict, end this war that it started, or not? We'll find out. But it's clear that virtually the entire world has come together in support of the proposal. And the only open question is, will Hamas say yes?
On another occasion, standing next to his Israeli terrorist friend, Blinken once again blamed Hamas for opposing the ceasefire, when in reality he was aware that the person standing next to him didn't want this carnage, this savagery to stop.
And the only reason that wouldn't be achieved is because of Hamas. There is a proposal on the table, and as we've said, no delays, no excuses. The time is now, and the time is now long past due.
It was around this time the Israeli terrorists began bombing residential buildings, libraries, schools, hospitals, and setting tents of Palestinian refugees in Rafah on fire. This was despite the Biden administration publicly opposing the move. However, when Israelis showed the middle finger to their American slaves, this disgusting guy from the White House called John Kirby justified the Israeli barbarity by calling it a limited action. Kirby too blamed Hamas in September last year for obstructing the ceasefire efforts.
And is the White House prepared to increase pressure on Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire deal, potentially doing something similar as the United Kingdom in terms of withholding more weapons?
I can't think of anything we haven't put more pressure on ourselves on than to try to get this deal. And we still, I think I just drew on myself. I think we We know how urgent this is, and we're working night and day to try to see if we can get a deal in place. Hamas is the main obstacle to this right now.
Now you can imagine just how horrible US politicians are, regardless of whether they are liberal Democrats or right-wing Republicans. These rogue US politicians have the blood of these Palestinian men, women, children, and babies on their hands. They are solely responsible for the destruction of Gaza. Clearly, as politicians, their loyalty is to work for the rogue regime of Israel and never for the US. This is what the interference of AIPAC has done to US politics and its society at large. I wonder how Americans are fine with this and why there isn't any uprising to weed out this cancer from the US. Dear Americans, you will have to live with this stain for the rest of your life, in fact for generations to come. There will be no escaping from this brutal reality. After all, we are talking about your country's direct participation in the biggest Holocaust since the Second World War, live streamed in real time on our mobile devices. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. Details are there in the description of this video. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.